And we're back. I'm Jack, your British goat, and today we got the American Civil War. This is part 1 from OverSimplified. Let's go.
Okay, Mrs. Lincoln, this is it. One last push, and we're
I
done.
don't know much really about the American Civil War at all.
9 months and 4 days ago, my father brought forth upon my mother
Abraham
himself,
Lincoln.
and gave to her a child, conceived in a shack in Kentucky, and dedicated to the proposition that I will drink num-nums from
All I know about him is that
my pants for the next 2 to 3 years.
he was
What did the
assassinated.
Phillies do again? Oh yeah.
Like, quickly, but literally the only thing I know about the Civil War, and I could be wrong in it, is it was about the abolition of the slave trade. And I'm probably wrong in that is the reason for it. Maybe that might just been one of the reasons. But literally that is all I know about the Civil War.
I am not touching that.
But we're going to learn. We're going to learn right now.
Grew up with his relatively poor family in Kentucky, eventually moving to Indiana, and finally, Illinois. He read a lot of books, worked a lot of jobs, wrote some questionable poetry, and finally entered the law profession. Despite being self-taught, he turned out to be a pretty clever and astute lawyer. In one case, a guy claimed he witnessed a murder.
As you should be, I
and
think,
Lincoln
if you
was
were to be
"Have
president.
you seen anything in the dark? There was a bright full moon." A what? A bright full moon. Can you say that again, please? There was a bright full moon. A dim half moon? No, a bright full moon. That's funny, because according to this almanac, there was a dim half moon that night, which makes you
There
a
wouldn't have been
liar.
any lights, would there?
Well, I got a bright full moon for y'all right here. Now that's what I call a rebuttal.
It's kind of crazy, like, when you try and think of
Lincoln and
what
his
life would have been
weren't
like.
only interested in law, however, he also dabbled in
It's
the
also
world of
very
politics,
ugly.
serving as a legislator in both local and national assemblies. And what a time it was. Not even 100 years after the founding fathers wrote all men are created equal, politicians were already asking, yeah, but what does that mean?
1776, we know
Exactly.
that.
It means all men. Yeah, but what does that mean exactly? And not just that. States' rights versus the federal government. What are the executive powers of the president? Is cereal a soup?
So, so basically they're saying all men, but then the other guy's kind of trying to say, does that include just white men? Is that, again, because of that is my understanding of the Civil War, is that that's what it was over, and I'm probably going to learn different here, but listen, we didn't learn anything like this in school. So I'm going into it thinking that is why, and that's, so if I'm wrong, we will find out, but
to interpretation. And the biggest question,
of course, let me know down
moment
stuff in the
was
comments as
slavery,
well.
An
Yeah,
ugly
yeah.
mark on what should have been a revolutionary new nation based on liberty and democracy. Thomas Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of losing Southern states' support, it was removed. Hey guys, do you think leaving this a little vague will create any unforeseen problems in the future? Cannonball!
But didn't
And
he
those
have
unforeseen
slaves
problems
himself,
are
or
now
was that
beginning to
someone
rear
else out of
their
them
ugly
lot?
heads. As the nation developed, the North and the South developed along two very different lines, and two very different cultural identities emerged. Northern cities began rapidly
Obviously,
industrializing,
Spain still
while the
owned a
southern
lot
climate
of,
allowed for large plantations of labor-intensive crops. As a result, one half of the country didn't rely on slaves, while the other half had become economically dependent on them. In 1793,
Right.
Eli Whitney's cotton gin caused the slave trade in the South to explode, while in the North, a growing abolitionist movement was taking root. A general mistrust began to
I
develop.
don't want to
between
keep
the North
pausing it,
and the
but like, in that blue part of America right now, again, this all might be answered, but would have black people been free? Like, they could have gone about their lives. I'd imagine it still would have been very difficult for them, but would have they been able to go about their lives? I know nothing about any of this. We really did not learn anything about this, and I honestly think that's a shame.
As Northerners felt the
it's almost like it's been
from
hidden.
expanding slavery, and fear spread throughout the South that the North wanted to take their slaves away. In 1819, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states.
We've got a bit more
perfect
land here
balance.
now.
A happy medium, a harmonious relationship. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm Missouri, and I would like to become the 23rd state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a free state. Oh no, you don't. You're trying to get one over on us. Missouri's going to be a slave state. Okay, listen. Why don't we just ask Missouri what it wants to be, and we slave state. Well,
Okay.
then, allow me to introduce to you the newest, freshest state on the scene, Maine. Hey, you can't do that, and you can't have any more slave states above this line. What? The issue of slavery is solved, and it will never come up again. A few years later, it came up again. You see, as America expanded westward, each new
When
state
you
or
think
territory
about it now, it's
threatened to
crazy,
upend the
isn't
delicate
it?
balance between the slave and free states. If one faction managed to outnumber the other,
That, you
it
can
gained
have slaves, but only this
forcing
amount.
its own ideals on the opposing side, leaving a huge portion of the population feeling spiteful and oppressed. For a while, compromises kicked the can down the road and kept the volatile balance in check, as new free and slave states were roughly added in pairs. But then one loudmouth state just had to barge in and ruin everything as usual.
Texas.
The addition of Texas saw the United States enter into a war with Mexico.
It's
which they
big,
won,
innit?
getting a huge amount of land out west and causing
Excuse
even
me.
more problems. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm California, and I would like to become the 31st state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a southern slave state. Oh no, you don't. You're trying to get one over on us. California's going to be a free state. Okay, listen. Why don't we just ask California what it wants to be, and we can free state. Well,
I was going to say, from what I know of
allowing
California,
to
that
introduce you
surely
the
would not
territories of
have.
New Mexico and Utah, able to freely vote for slavery themselves. Hey, you can't do that. And we can enter Northern Territory anytime we want to recapture escaped slaves. What? The issue of slavery is solved, and it will never
Wow.
come up again. A few years later, it came up again. In 1854, a Democratic senator from Illinois wanted to build a
Again, I just don't understand. I know it was a different time, but it was about 170 years ago. If my math is mathing right now, but like, I just don't understand the whole the mindset there. Like, I don't know. I can't even explain in words. I just don't understand.
trained here and proposed that the territories of Kansas and Nebraska be created open to slavery, even though they were.
I guess they
above
didn't
the
see them
compromise
as
line. Obviously,
humans,
the Northern
right?
states were like, hell no. But the Southern Democrats who controlled Congress at the time were like, well, if
That's
you love
almost like
liberty and democracy
property
so much,
and
then you should let them vote on whether slavery should be legal or not.
tools.
And so it was. Huge numbers of pro and anti-slavery settlers rushed to Kansas to sway the vote in their favor. And while they were all there, they began to beat the crap out of each other. One of those settlers was
Right.
a man named John Brown, a former businessman who failed at
Do we
just
like
about
John
everything
Brown?
he tried and went arguably insane. He was a radical abolitionist and dedicated much of his life to the Underground Railroad and freeing
We like
slaves.
John Brown.
One night, in revenge for an earlier raid by
So
pro-slavery
far.
forces, he and his sons killed a number of pro-slavery settlers in the territory, helping to kickstart years of violence known as Bleeding Kansas. Kansas and Nebraska both eventually voted in favor of outlawing slavery. But from here,
Okay.
the tension began to grow at a rapid pace. In 1852, author Harriet Beecher Stowe penned Uncle Tom's Cabin, a best-selling novel that exposed the terrible cruelty of slavery to the world. Oh, how awful. How morally corrupt a nation must be to allow such things to happen. Your Majesty, what
But
should we do
didn't
about
we
all the
have
starving
slaves?
children working in the coal mines? Nothing! In 1854, the Republican Party was formed, and Abraham Lincoln emerged as a leading figure. Southern Democrats viewed the new Republican Party with mistrust, believing it to be radical and abolitionist. In 1856, a politician named Charles
Again, my very limited knowledge of American politics, but from what I see on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, I would have assumed that would have been the other way round, because all I see is that the Republicans are the racists and the Democrats are the nice ones. But here it's the other way round.
Sumner gave a speech in Congress, calling out slave-owning Democrats with fiery language. If slavery was a woman, she'd be an ugly one. And the senator from South Carolina would like to boink her. Representative Brooks, do you have a rebuttal? Oh, I have a rebuttal, all right.
That was said.
Here's a rebuttal for you. Oh, come on. Surely this isn't allowed. I don't know. I'll have to consult the rulebook. I can't find anything about caning a political opponent, but it says here I'm not allowed to wear women's underwear. Uh-oh. News of the violence on the Senate floor took the nation by storm. Southern slave owners sent Representative Brooks new canes to replace his now broken one. And on the floors of Congress, politicians carried weapons in self-defense,
Jesus.
which is never a good sign. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled
How
in the Dred
civilized.
Scott case that all people of African descent, slave or free, could not be citizens, and therefore could not sue for their own freedom under any circumstances, undoing years of progress with the strike of a gavel. Now, within all this
That's
bitter debate
crazy.
over slavery, there were many nuances. North versus South, Republican versus Democrat, states versus the federal government. But let's strip all of that away. For 4 million individuals living in America, this wasn't about political intrigue or party alignment. It was about the basic human right to be free.
For
Men,
sure.
women, and children were stolen from their homelands and brought to the American continent, where for generations they were considered to be property, forced to live in poverty, and work from sunrise
They
to
were
sunset.
sold by
Plantation overseers did
people
whatever
from
they felt was
Africa.
necessary
Like,
to get the
they
most
weren't
out of their
stolen,
slaves.
but
Punishments were
well,
often
they were stolen, but
Families were regularly separated, and parents could often only watch.
They're
as
just
their children were
disgusting.
auctioned off, never to be
that's
seen
disgusting.
again. Thousands of slaves took the treacherous risk of running away, and abolitionists in the North helped many escape via the Underground Railroad as bounty hunters entered the North to chase them down. Leading figures within the abolitionist movement included many significant free black men and women. But it's important to note that for many of the anti-slavery white individuals in the North, opposition to slavery was often an economic issue, not a moral one, as many worried large plantations would take their lands and livelihoods away. Abraham Lincoln knew that slavery was a moral evil, and he regularly spoke out against it in powerful speeches.
But that's a way of, I guess, I don't know how to word it, but like, you are against it, but if I actively try and get it away from me and away from that, I could then lose everything. So as much as I hate it, I need it. It's selfish, but I guess back in those times when money, time's hard, there's no justifying it. There's no justifying it, but like
Them rise through the ranks of the
it's very
He lamented at
interesting.
the hypocrisy of a great American nation meant to stand as a shining beacon of freedom while also enslaving 4 million men, women, and children. He most famously declared in 1858 that a house divided against itself.
I didn't know it was 4 million. I thought it was a lot less.
Would end. However, even Lincoln was cautious in his opposition. He didn't want to outlaw it entirely, but simply prevent its expansion, so that given enough time, he believed it would naturally die out. Thankfully, history would force his hand. In October 1859, one abolitionist decided he'd try to single-handedly take down slavery by force. Who would be crazy enough to even attempt such a thing? It's our good friend, John Brown.
Shout out John
He
Brown.
arms from an armory in the town of Harper's Ferry, free the slaves there, and continue south, inciting a major slave uprising along the way. A noble cause, a bad plan, and terrible execution. Brown's men took the armory and some hostages, but were quickly surrounded by one Robert E. Lee and his U.S. Marines. Brown was captured, and a couple of months later, he was executed for treason. Northerners sympathized.
I was hoping he'd go on an absolute tear.
You see this? They're coming for us. Soon, there'll be 1 million John Browns. 1 million John Browns? What on earth are you thinking
For
about?
fuck's
John Brown
sake.
Farm? Yeah, me too.
Is that supposed to be Colonel Sanders or
New England
something
free
from
states
the
meant now the southern
KFC?
states really were outnumbered, and they were beginning to feel bitterly spiteful and oppressed. Further fear began to spread in the South when news broke that a relatively unknown figure had just secured the Republican Party nomination for president. Abraham Lincoln, mostly well-liked among anti-slavery Northerners, had made some of the most powerfully worded speeches against slavery of any politician at the time. And now, there was a chance that he and his cheekbones could become president.
I guess if he became
South,
president, he
that
could.
would be too much.
Yeah.
In the 1860 election, Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 southern states. But much to their horror, when the final results came in, Lincoln had won by an electoral college landslide. Lincoln himself.
I don't understand the voting
How
process
many
in America.
times
It
do I have
seems
to tell
weird.
you, I'm not going to take away your slaves. Yeah, right, honest Abe. We've had enough of you Northerners. We're going to go form our own country.
Wait, so
You
he
can't
didn't
do
want to
that.
take the.
Why not? Well, if you had won the election, would it be okay for us to leave? Of course not. Well, why not? Because that's not how victim mentality works. Many states felt that when they joined the Union, they always withheld the right to leave it whenever they pleased. Many people living in 19th century America.
As always, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel and you're enjoying this video, you're enjoying me, what are you playing at? Take it off full screen right now. I know you're on full screen. Just fucking take it off full screen right now. See that little subscribe button? It looks beautiful, but you have not yet pressed it. Press that button right now. I'm going to give you a couple seconds to do that. I will sit here and wait. I am very stubborn. That gives you enough time. Thank you very much if you did go below and hit that subscribe. And if you didn't,
Often felt more loyalty to
you're
their
just a
state than
hater.
to the nation. And now, with the South feeling like it had lost its voice in the federal government, they were out of here. South Carolina.
So we're not even at
was to
50
go,
yet,
and
are
over
we?
a period of 6 months, one by one,
Or
11
are
slave
we?
states officially seceded from the Union, with just 4 contested border states opting to remain. The seceding states issued a number of official documents justifying their secession. South Carolina proclaimed that it was northern states' hostility to slavery that rendered the federal government illegitimate. Mississippi declared that their position was thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. And in a speech, the Confederate vice president stated that the new Confederate government
Alexander
rested upon what he
Stevens.
called the great truth.
God, they're all ugly, aren't they? Like, I mean, I'm
American
not
generals such as Robert
gays, I wouldn't rate
opted
man's
to side
looks,
with
but
their
they
states
are
over the Union. And with all the
ugly.
chaos, one New York lawyer wrote that rather than a bold eagle, America's national bird should be a debilitated chicken. And hey, I kind of like that. One man watching the crisis.
Nah, the eagle's
knew it
cool.
would be his job to solve it. Lincoln was just about to hop on a train and become the president of the United States of America. Hey man, you're hella ugly. Grow a beard or something to hide that face. Good idea. Still ugly.
I feel
With
bad now.
assassination plots already underway, Lincoln had to travel to Washington, D.C. under heavy disguise and protection. All along the way, he received stacks of threatening letters. May the hand of the devil strike you down. You are destroying this country. Damn you, every breath you take. Love from...
Just a crazy
At his
mindset, you know?
inauguration speech, Lincoln once again reiterated that no, I do not want to take away anyone's slaves. But for Lincoln, he did want to preserve the Union. He declared secession to be nothing but an illegitimate rebellion. In your hands and not in mine, he said, is the momentous issue of civil war. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. We are not enemies, but friends. It was clear Lincoln was ready and willing to get freaky and open up a can of Scatman John if he had to.
It-
Whether he had the
it's-
support of the people, however, was in question. In the end, it was the Confederates that fired the first shot. As they seceded, the Confederate states began seizing federal U.S. property throughout the South. Off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, was one such federal property.
I guess they have
Held by a
the
recently
ocean, but it's probably no
clandestine
help
US
for them
force.
really because they're
The
fighting in
Confederate
land.
militia there demanded the fort surrender, a request which was quickly denied. And any remaining hope for a peaceful solution to the secession crisis probably then died when the Confederates did this. The Battle of Fort Sumter is considered to be the beginning of the American
Fort
Civil War.
Sumter.
Many of the Confederates there also considered it to be the end of the American Civil War. They hoped Old Abe would just sigh and say, "Okay, you win." Unfortunately for them,
God,
Lincoln
no.
actually said, "You're about to get a roundhouse to the face." Lincoln sent out the call for 75,000 volunteers, and men signed up in droves, hopeful
Wow.
for some adventure and good old-fashioned F-U-N. In the new Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia, Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his cheekbones had also sent out the call for 100,000 men. As ever, both sides hoped for a quick end to the war. Is it over yet?
Trying
No.
really hard not to
It's been 1 week.
sneeze.
Is it over now? No. How about now? If you ask that one more time, I swear I will turn this army around and you'll all have to go back home to your wives and
That
children.
reminds you of a
But in
Family
particular, the
Guy
South Atlantic
joke.
conflict would pose a bit of a challenge. How can
Which,
we expect to win with a
is on
population
thing
of
with
only
the
5
slave
million
trade,
against
but
22 million in the north?
when they're
If
on
you
the
count
slave
us 4
ship.
million slaves, you'd have 9 million. Great idea. Hand these rifles out to all the Wait a minute. You almost had me there. The problem for Lincoln was that many of his top generals were getting old and were being a bit too cautious. The commanding general was a man named Winfield Scott, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, and by now he was too fat to even mount a horse.
Jesus.
Okay, chaps, we need to come up with a plan. Hit me. We could wait for the Confederates to come and apologize. Maybe we should all sit in a circle and discuss our feelings. Crossing the Delaware into New Jersey worked for me. Those are all terrible ideas. And you? Wrong video. Hey, I'm the greatest president in the history of this nation. Yeah, we'll see about that, dingus. Eventually, Lincoln's generals came up with
But what it does intrigue me though is of actually how, I mean, that is a lot of space down below for them, but like, like I said, I just can't wrap my head around it all. Like, I want to kill all of you so I can keep these people working for free and I own them. I just can't get into that mindset. There's a lot of things in the world that I can't get my head into. I can't get wrap my head around, you know, a lot of takes that they say the people from the left have. I can't get my head around it. So like this, but I just can't get my head around. Will make me go, I'm gonna go and fight to keep these people. Like I just don't get it.
First, a blockade would cut off and starve the South of supplies by sea. Secondly, taking control of
I mean,
the
that
great
would be
Mississippi
smart.
River would sever the South's economic artery while splitting it in two. And finally, a main Union force in the east would move south and take the Confederate capital, ending the war. Bada boom, bada bing. Skirmishes began to break out across the nation, and the Union army in the east began to move south towards Richmond. Everything seemed to be going well until they reached Manassas, where they came upon a large Confederate force. It's almost like they were waiting for us. How did they know? As it turned out, spies
Isn't it
from
a
DC
red
had
flag
sent
with a
coded message to
white
the
cross or
Confederates
something?
warning of the invasion. Did
In
you
like an
use
X?
NordVPN? What the heck is NordVPN? I'm so glad you asked. And superly does it help us? Is there some but with just a click of a button, you can still blocked in your amazing.com. That's only oversimplified session,
WSKIN.
and the Union invasion into Virginia. The two sides encountered each other at Manassas and both geared up for the first major battle of the Civil War, the First Battle of Bull Run. The Confederates
Bull
rapidly
Run.
brought in support via rail, and the two sides were about equal in numbers. However, they were also equally
Nice.
inexperienced.
Big
A large
numbers
number of
compared to
civilians
the
also rode out by carriage from DC to picnic on the
War of
nearby hills
Independence.
and watch the excitement unfold. Nobody seemed to quite understand how destructive this war was going to be. The Union forces pulled a flanking maneuver to hit the Confederates on their left, and the two sides fired on each other in rows. Farm families living in the area were forced to flee the fighting, including a man named Wilmer McLean. Hurry up, Martha! There's a war out here! The more you tell me to hurry up, the slower I will go! The Union force saw
You know, I've
initial success,
had
pushing
a
the
few
Confederates
women
back
in my
the
life like
enemy.
that.
But
Fuck
one
yeah,
as of
hell.
yet fairly unknown General Thomas Jackson had arrived, and he took a defensive position, standing firm like a stone wall, holding the Union army off, and finally sending them running back to Washington D.C.
So they're winning.
The sobering
Let's just quickly look at that. 480, 390, 16,000, 12 and 12. Only 12 missing. Don't know how that works
War
out.
hit both sides hard, and the North, having just lost
I guess
the
they
first major
just
battle, had to face
burned
the serious
the bodies or
prospect that they
something.
may not actually win this war. President Lincoln, General Jackson whipped us so hard, the Confederates are calling him Stonewall Jackson. Wait, that's why they're calling him that? Not because he looks like he ran face first into a stone wall? Apparently not. Worse yet, the North had also lost the first major battle out west, giving away control of southwest Missouri. All of this was terrible news for Abraham Lincoln, especially since many of his generals and cabinet already didn't have much respect for him. They felt he was incapable of running a war, because he seemed a bit like your friendly...
Like, so far, it's a bit like, how are you going to turn this round?
Story and a good pun. I've been so busy, my wife is missing me. But her aim is starting to improve. But deep down, few realized he could also be incredibly shrewd. Oh, Abe, you're so funny.
Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown?
Abe, I was just... No, funny how? Like I'm here to amuse you? During the war, Lincoln committed acts that were viewed by some as impeachable. His administration suppressed the free media from printing articles sympathetic towards the South. Some Southern sympathizers were even arrested without a trial. Lincoln's criticizers began accusing him of being a tyrant. But to quote the man himself, "Hey, it's war, baby. What are you gonna do?" By the end of 1861, with things already looking bad for the
I mean,
North,
he's a good guy, but
abolitionists
he's
such as
also
Frederick
not.
Douglass couldn't believe that the Union Army weren't enlisting black men. He continued to put pressure on Lincoln to make the war about emancipation. "Mr. President, it's time to make the war about emancipation." I don't want to ruffle any feathers. The feathers are already ruffled. But Lincoln, hanging on to hope for a quick end to the conflict, continued to fight only for...
Like, to me, that's like the South. I'd understand why they wouldn't want black people in the army, because that's what it's over. You know, they will turn on them, as they should, right? They want their freedom. But the North, why on earth would you not enlist them? Because they are going to want to abolish slavery more than Abraham Lincoln, anyone fighting for him would. Like, that just, the mindset is so barbaric to me. Like,
It was decided, however, that escaped slaves
hell.
from the Confederacy could be held as enemy contraband, and many of these men were put to work bolstering the Union's infrastructure and supply lines. Hoping to get things moving, Lincoln made young General George McClellan the new commanding general, and McClellan began to train up his men. He thought a lot of himself, however, and believed he was
So they
going to be the
used
nation's great
slaves?
savior. And like many others, he didn't approve of the president's handling of the war.
Just because they
On one occasion,
escaped?
Lincoln
Or did
went
I hear
to
that
McClellan's
wrong?
house to meet with him, but McClellan was
So
late
they're all
returning home.
dickheads, aren't they?
He kept
Let's
the
be
president
honest.
waiting, and when he finally got there, he just straight up went to bed. Now that's what I call disrespectful. McClellan talked the talk, but could he walk the walk? No. Like Lincoln's other generals, McClellan was maddeningly cautious. "Hey man, could you move south and attack the enemy?" "What? Are you crazy? What if they have a big scary army down there?" "They probably do." "What? Oh my gosh!" McClellan worried that he did not have the numbers he needed to fight effectively. "What if they have like 10,000 men?" "Okay, no problem. We'll get you 20,000 men." "Well, what if they have 30,000 men?" "I'll need 40." "Okay, you can have 40." "Well, what if they have 50?" "I'll need 60." Lincoln tried, but it was all in vain. McClellan would not make a move for the rest of the year. The North's one saving grace for now was a general out west fighting in Kentucky and Tennessee, General Ulysses S. Grant. Cool, collected,
Ulysses
methodical, and a
S.
big fan
Grant.
of whiskey.
We've got to remember
His
all
chief of
these
staff
names.
took it upon himself to keep Grant sober. One officer said that Grant habitually wore an expression as though he were determined to drive his head through a brick wall and was about to do it. And that determination led him to score a number of key victories when others around
Nice.
him were failing. At the Battle of Fort Donelson, Grant was like, "Why does Stonewall Jackson get a cool nickname and I don't? I want a cool nickname." "Sir, the Confederates say they're ready to surrender and want to know your terms." "No terms, just unconditional surrender." Hey, unconditional surrender Grant. That's a pretty cool nickname, right? Guys? Right? Later in April 1862, the Confederates
tell me that
launched a
wasn't
sudden
his
attack on
nickname.
Grant's army at Shiloh, but the determined, unconditional surrender Grant threw his lines at the rebels and sent them running. The battle resulted in the heaviest casualties in U.S. history
Wow.
so far, and despite his victory, Grant found himself under fire. You have to get rid of Grant. Why? Didn't he win? Yes, but he just threw his men at the enemy. Isn't that the point? Also, he's a loony drunk. Well, what does he like to drink? I
So
believe
they were
whiskey, sir.
treated like
Then
cannon
send
fodder.
him more. Lincoln watched as his cabinet did nothing but bicker, and his generals did nothing. But then, worst of all, personal tragedy struck. Lincoln's young son, Willie, very much loved by the president, died of typhoid fever.
Why would you
at the
call
age
your
of
son
11.
Willie?
Lincoln
That's
was a
crazy.
sensitive man and was heavily affected by the loss. His wife was inconsolable. But one of Lincoln's greatest traits, what made him such a great leader, was in the darkest of times, with composure and determination, he kept moving forward. He knew it was his responsibility to hold himself and his family together, and by doing so, he hoped to hold the nation together.
Oh, that's like
And
a
he
Hitler
had it
haircut.
with McClellan's in action. Lincoln decided he was going to take control. In March 1862, Lincoln firmly ordered McClellan to once again move south towards Richmond. McClellan insisted instead they move by sea to the Virginia Peninsula and attack Richmond from the southeast. "Yes," said Lincoln. "Okay, anything." Lincoln held on to some of McClellan's men to defend D.C. from a nearby Stonewall Jackson wreaking havoc in the Shenandoah Valley, and he sent McClellan south. McClellan landed on the peninsula, and he began to move inland.
Like,
He came
neither
up
have
against a
gained
small
really
Confederate
any
army
ground,
that
have
dug in
they?
at Yorktown. McClellan vastly outnumbered the force, but it's said that Confederate General Magruder deceived McClellan by cleverly maneuvering his smaller force and making McClellan believe he faced a huge army. No, you have way more men than them.
Strange question, because I know this is of the Civil War. Is this around the cowboy times? Like, really, the only thing really over here, unless you're looking in history and something, you know about America around the 1800s, is Red Dead Redemption and cowboys. That's like it.
Move forward. No. McClellan settled in for a month-long siege, giving time for Johnston to move south from Manassas and Magruder time to retreat. When he finally entered the city and found it deserted, he declared it a victory, calling his success brilliant. Then, after meeting some resistance at Williamsburg, McClellan moved to within just 20 miles of Richmond, his armies able to hear the church bells ringing in the enemy capital. You still outnumber them. Go give him hell. No. McClellan once again held back, moving slowly
Flank
and
him.
offensively. And with his army split in two, the Confederates saw an opportunity to strike back. McClellan's advance was halted, and now the Confederates pulled an ace out of their sleeve. General Lee.
There's a fly in there, and
Do you
it's
think we should evacuate
pissing me
Richmond?
off.
No, Mr. President. No need. General Robert E. Lee, one of the most brilliant military commanders of the time, was now in charge. One of his biggest strengths was his ability to read the mind of his enemy, and he knew McClellan was cautious and weak. After moving Stonewall Jackson south to join him, and
He does
only had a
appear
smaller
in-
army, Lee hit McClellan in a series of
You'd probably
fast-paced
say he's the
close-combat
biggest
battles
hero
that
in,
had McClellan spooked. McClellan retreated
American
the Union
history,
army
but he
back
seems like
again
a massive
and
pussy right
and
now.
again, escaping the peninsula and returning to D.C. Lee had defeated McClellan, and the campaign had failed. Well, that was a major success. A success? Tell me exactly what was successful about that. Well, we successfully retreated. You lost. I didn't lose. I merely
Lincoln,
failed
just
to win.
kill him,
Things
man.
just kept
Shoot him
looking
in the
worse
head.
for the North. At least their navy had
You don't
seen
want
some
pussies.
success, capturing a number of key port cities, notably when they steamrolled past Confederate forts to take New Orleans. And speaking of the navy, both sides had begun using ironclads. So that's pretty cool. But in the east, they still weren't
I don't
having
know
their
what that
luck.
is.
After McClellan's disastrous
Excuse me.
campaign, Lincoln briefly sent out one General John Pope to attack Northern Virginia. Hey man, just checking in. How's it going? Well, the Confederates kicked my butt at Cedar Mountain. Then they raided my camp and ran off with my money and clothes.
Is he supposed to be
I
Jesus?
appear to have been wedgied. Lee defeated Pope at yet another battle at Bull Run, in which nearby farm families once again got caught up in the fighting. Hurry up, Martha! There's another war out here! I'm waiting for my hair to dry! Wilmer McLean, sick of war, moved his family south, where he knew the war would definitely, absolutely, never touch him again. But Lincoln had yet another problem to contend with. European powers, in particular the UK, were looking increasingly like they may intervene diplomatically on the side of the Confederates. They were missing their precious supply of southern cotton because of the Union blockade, and they wanted to see a swift conclusion to the war. The tension between
I
America
hope
and
not.
Great Britain had been increasing, especially after Confederate diplomats were discovered on a British ship. Now, after McClellan's failure to take Richmond, the UK declared it impossible for the North to win. Lincoln needed something
Wow.
to prevent Europe from getting involved. And
I
after
didn't
more
know
petitioning
that.
from abolitionists, he decided maybe the time
I
was
thought
finally
we
right
were
to
on the
make
north
war
side,
about
so
ending
that's,
the institution he hated, slavery.
Okay.
If the North had a noble cause to fight for, Europe would be less likely to intervene. But Lincoln and his cabinet knew before they could declare something as radical as emancipation, they needed a victory, especially now that the Confederates were about to go on the attack. Aware that he had a limited number of men and supplies, Lee now hoped that if he could just threaten Washington, D.C. militarily, he would gain Europe's recognition and crush Northern morale in time for the midterm elections, forcing the North to negotiate. With confidence at an all-time high, for the first time, Robert E. Lee invaded the North. But on September 13th, the North finally had some luck. Oh boy, it's my lucky day. A cigar in a field. Hey, what's this wrapped around it? Oh my gosh! That's right, the North had discovered General Lee's battle plans wrapped around some cigars. And in them, they saw that Lee had split up his forces.
What?
McClellan headed out from D.C., and the two sides met in the battle.
That has got to be an insider. That no way.
Crucial battle that would decide the course of the war. It saw the most vicious fighting to date, and still remains the single bloodiest day in American
Wow.
history. But
Okay.
for once, the North came out.
Never heard of it.
And Lee was forced to retreat. He's on the run. Chase him down and finish him off. No.
Ah, kill this
You know
prick.
what, old buddy, old pal? You're fired. The North had won their crucial victory. Lincoln breathed a huge sigh of relief, and with that win, he was prepared to take a huge step. On September 22nd, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. In January, all slaves held in the Confederate States would be, as far as the U.S. government was concerned, officially free.
Okay.
Throughout the North, free black men and women rejoiced, knowing that if the North were to win, their brothers and sisters would no longer be held in bondage. The proclamation also had the intended effect on Europe, who were not.
Man, how horrible would that be though? Like,
an outraged
you knew that you are technically free in the eyes of the law and the government, but you're still treated and you're still working on these fields and you're still a slave. Like,
Better
man.
that Lincoln had given the war a new meaning. It was no longer just about the.
I want to hear about like revolts
Now it was about
from,
creating a new
you know,
country,
the
washed
slaves
clean
in the
of its
South.
original sin. A
I want to
union
hear about like
without
them.
slavery.
And there's got to be some incredible stories of like the Underground Railroad that we saw. Like, I want to look at things like that because to me that's so interesting. Let me know what you think of it down below, and of course, way down there, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, check out part 2, which will be out tomorrow. Bruce.